And a little bit later this hour, I'll be speaking to Lawson Naidu of CASAC about today's decision in Parliament and the implications of it. But let's move to this story. And of course, it's the news that Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who died over the weekend, will be laid to rest on Friday. He was 95 years old, our country's longest serving MP. As remember him, let's bring in veteran political reporter Paddy Harper with the Mail and Guardian. Paddy, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's fair to say that you and Mangosuthu Buthelezi were old foes. You often had a go at each other in the media. I was just looking at an article just a little earlier this year. He was given a right of reply after you called him the Vladimir Putin of Matlabatini. He said you used him as his whipping boy when you didn't have anything better to write about. Talk to me about your relationship with him. I mean, you were clear in your criticism, but was there a grudging respect for this man who really stayed the distance in politics?
Hi, and thanks for having me. It's impossible not to have respect for someone who had built, it's such a durable political party. He ran it himself for 44 years. It's still in existence now, and it's the fourth biggest party in the country. That legacy is there. I'd been a critic over the years, but obviously, and as a journalist covering sort of the activities of him and the party since 1986, I'd written things that he wasn't happy with. I think he first corrected me in a letter to my editor and in a speech in the old KwaZulu legislature in 1987. So there's been an exchange of words between us and letters between us since then.
Continue.
But I think absolutely. He built a party that's still there. It's still functional. It's at this point in time has a potential of possibly regaining KwaZulu-Natal and an alliance through a coalition with the DA. So, the political entities there. Covering the province here, covering politics here during that time in the 80s and the 90s. The political violence was there. The TRC made certain findings with regard to the then Inkatha. Buthelezi himself challenged it. He went to court to try and stop the report. And he contested that sort of interpretation of him and of his party right up until the time of his death.
Do you think we'll ever get to the truth of those issues? There's so many things that, the Truth Commission was such a mammoth undertaking, but by its own admission, it didn't get all the answers. Do you think that, do you have a fair idea of where Mangosuthu Buthelezi stood on that? As you say, he did challenge those findings. He actually said that Walter Felgate lied to the Truth Commission, where he linked Buthelezi to the apartheid government's Bureau of State Security. So he was emphatic that those were lies told. Do you think the truth has come out? Do you think it ever will?
I think the truth has come out. It's there in the TRC findings. They didn't get to everything, but they got to some things. The findings around Inkatha were based on the documentation, the state documentation around Operation Marion. That was the training of IFP hit squads to give the party an offensive capacity against the UDF and the ANC. That's there. That's history. That's fact. But that was a conflict in which both sides were guilty of violence. But the reality is that he actually took that step of requesting the training and the resources to develop that offensive capacity. That was a step way beyond defense. He always presented the IFP as having acted in self-defense. That's way beyond self-defense.
And if we go back to the days leading up to our first democratic election, it was so much touch and go that the IFP wasn't even on the original printed ballot papers. They had to have a sticker put on just a day or so beforehand. Talk to me about what he was like during that time and why things were nearly scuppered with his party not, almost not taking part.
His party went into the negotiations with a set of demands that were based around a sort of federal state, self-determination for KwaZulu. Those obviously, what was settled was what they achieved was a little less than that. But yeah, it was a fearsome thing that we saw then. You know, you had this negotiation taking place, but in the streets, people were dying. So you had that, yeah, those sort of two processes playing out. It was a very, very scary time. I mean, a time when it delayed the process of transition. And I mean, and a lot of lives were lost at that time. And I mean, he played a very belligerent role. I mean, the brinkmanship is the kind of term that was used around the tactic that he used, that idea of kind of taking negotiation to the brink with armed action taking place in the street. Yeah, and it worked. I mean, it didn't work in terms of a federal state, but it worked in terms of what we have now in terms of the Ingonyama Trust, etc. Those are all agreements that came out of that negotiations process in terms of engaging him and his people and bringing them back to the negotiating table and getting them to the polls.
During, after that transition, and obviously he became an elder statesman, and we would see him, I mean, remarkably continuing on as an MP much longer than many people had predicted. Do you think that he mellowed? I mean, with such a long political career, it's perfectly plausible that someone would have many different incarnations, perhaps even realizations about your path and how it should change. And if we think about how he spoke out openly in 2004 about the death of his son and of his daughter from HIV/AIDS, at a time when the stigma was high, when the government of the day was denying a link between HIV and AIDS, he was one of those leaders who took that principled stand, as Mandela did, saying, this has happened to my family. Such an important moment. Talk to me about those later years. What stands out for you?
I think that is one of the outstanding moments. I think another also is once a peace process had started, once there was a kind of parliamentary process going on, once he kind of saw that his idea of sort of protecting the Zulu kingdom, etc., had been achieved, there was no material threat, etc. I think he mellowed greatly because he had also seen that that had been achieved, that was safeguarded. I think there was that, there was age, there was also a change in the conditions in the relationship between his party and the ANC. Over time, that people that were at war with each other were sitting in parliament together. And all of that, I think, fed into the role he played. Obviously, the issue of his age with that. So I think there was definitely a... Look, I mean, I looked, the last personal letter that I received from him was in 2018, and that response that you were speaking about was even more recent. So, I mean, that the fire remained in his belly, to borrow one of his own terms, right up until the end. But certainly, I think how he saw his role and what he needed to do, that changed in within his own analysis of himself, the party, and everything else.
Thank you so much for chatting to us. I mean, what a life indeed. And that, of course, is veteran political reporter Paddy Harper with the Mail and Guardian, just sharing his reflections of Mangosuthu Buthelezi. And, of course, they did have a number of run-ins over the years.